And we say this every year. Boy, it seems like more injuries than usual. I feel like it's always the same level, but is it? Does it seem like it's more now that the pads are on and guys who didn't have off-season workouts, who weren't able to work out like they would in a normal year, does it seem like they are being injured at a higher rate than they were in the past?
It does to me. It does seem like the numbers are higher, especially for these soft tissue injuries that we're seeing, some groins and hamstrings and quads and things like that, calf injuries. I feel like we're seeing more of those. I haven't seen any numbers to indicate that. And so maybe it's just the fact that we know they haven't had an off season, so it feels like more. Maybe this is still the point where we are. And a lot of these injuries, frankly, they could play through if it was the regular season. Tyreek Hill, if you'll remember, he had a similar hamstring thing back in the season when they played the Chargers. They had a bye week the next week, but he didn't miss any time from that. And so a lot of these injuries right now that they're having, they certainly could play through once the season starts. But to me, it does seem like the numbers are more than what they have been. I guess the good news is we haven't seen a bunch of stars go down with season-ending injuries to this point. I may have just jinxed it. I hope not. But to me, that's probably the good sign, is we haven't seen those big, the Robert Alford type injuries, TJ Logan, where guys are out for the year. We haven't seen a ton of those.
We have a new Dr. Doom on the program, Shireen Williams, talking about season-ending injuries and jinxing the players. I didn't say it. It's not me. If it happens, she's responsible for the jinx. Let me say this, though. I noticed the word minor a lot with these descriptions. I just wonder how much of that is aimed at downplaying it, so we don't have this avalanche of concern that there are too many injuries. Remember, in 2011, the year of the lockout, when there were no offseason programs, the injuries were up 25%. That's one of the reasons why the NFL Players Association pushed for this extended ramp-up period where teams didn't get into pads until this past Monday, after nearly 3 weeks of being in camp, at a time when the preseason games already would be happening. That's when they finally put the pads on, and now we're seeing guys get injured. But I just think it happens every year. I think we're going to have it every year. And you're right, Shireen. There hasn't been that, wow, this guy's out for the year, holy crap moment yet. And we both have now officially jinxed it. And again, we talked about this before. That it's one of the things that this time of year, it's that vague, nagging sense that it can happen, and we've seen time and again that it does happen. But so far, they do seem minor, whether they're being downplayed deliberately or not. We'll see when these guys get back on the field. And the balance that teams are trying to strike, Shireen, with only 80 guys in camp, you need to have enough healthy players on the field to get the work in, but you don't want to push guys too hard so that a minor injury becomes something that doesn't want to heal or becomes more than minor. And I don't envy these coaches and their obligation to try to figure out how to get their teams ready for what's coming in 3 weeks if they're striking that balance, or at least trying to strike that balance between getting the work in and not getting their guys injured. It reminds me of that awkward Todd Haley, Hugh Jackson conversation from Hard Knocks a couple of years ago. Do we live in our fears, or do we just throw caution to the wind and get our team ready even if guys are going to get injured?
And I think there's a good news, bad news situation with the preseason too, Mike. With no preseason this year, that's the good news. These guys don't get hurt. We see a lot of these injuries in August that come during preseason games, and we're not going to have that this year. But again, the tackling, I think Cliff Kingsbury talked about it yesterday. You know, how do you get guys ready when you're not having the contact that you normally would in the preseason with the games, and trying to balance that? So they also have to balance that. How do you get these guys ready in practice when they can't do as much as they normally would in a preseason because of the lack of preseason games? But at the same time, you're not getting these guys hurt in preseason games. So it's really a two-edged sword there with what's going on with the preseason games. But they'll have to figure out a way to rest these veterans, but at the same time get them ready, keep them healthy. And it's a delicate balance with some of these guys who have played 10 years or more to try to get them ready and keep them healthy at the same time, especially with the soft tissue injuries.
And we're 2 weeks away from the rosters being reduced from 80 to 53. And I've heard talk that some teams may get to 70, 69, that range early, with the 53 that'll be on the roster plus the 16 members of the practice squad, so that everyone who is there, as we get closer and closer to cutdown day, you know, the guys who are going to go, the guys at the bottom of the roster know who they are. And once those guys start to feel that it's coming, maybe they start to lose their COVID-19 focus and may do something stupid on their way out the door. Don't be surprised if within the next week or so, some of these teams voluntarily choose to trim down to the guys who they know are going to be there, or at least they're sending the message to those guys that we think you're going to be here now with waiver claims and potential trades and free agents and all the roster shuffling that happens in early September. Who knows? But when you get it down to the number where active roster plus practice squad equals how many guys you have, Shireen, that sends a pretty clear message that everyone who's there has a pretty damn good chance of being there for the season and has every reason to continue to be very vigilant about keeping the virus out of the building. So I won't be surprised if teams start dumping those last 10 guys earlier than they have to do it 15 days from today.
Well, and frankly, Mike, you keep that back into the roster for that fourth preseason game normally, because those are the guys who play. You don't play your starters in that fourth preseason game, or most teams don't. We know some teams do, but most teams don't play their starters in that last game. Well, you don't have that last game this year. There are no preseason games to worry about getting those guys in. So, yeah, it makes sense that you would cut down your roster sooner and make it clear to those guys you're going to be here, or if you're not going to be here, you may be here later. Do the right things now for COVID. There's a lot for coaches to worry about this month and this year, frankly, because of COVID, because of injuries, everything else. You know, they got two things really to worry about that are out of their control, which is the COVID numbers and then the injuries numbers to go with that, which is a normal year. They know they're going to have the injuries, and now they're going to have guys out with COVID too.
Let me circle back to the Tyron Smith injury. You know, we've just come to take for granted that the Cowboys have a very good offensive line, although it hasn't been as dominant the last year or two as it previously was. Tyron Smith banged up from time to time, getting older as we all are. Any real concern for Tyron Smith or some of these other guys who are missing time on the offensive line, or do we just continue to take for granted when it's time to go, they'll be ready to go and they'll be opening holes and protecting Dak Prescott, and the Cowboys' offense will be as potent as it was last year?
No, it's a great point, and I had that on my list of things here. You know, he's not yet 30, Tyron Smith, played 10 years. He started when he was 20 years old, came to the league very, very young. But he hasn't played a full season since 2015. And to me, the back injuries are the thing that you kind of worry about with guys like that, guys who have played a decade in this league. And he's been one of the best offensive tackles in football for a really long time now. But even though he's not yet 30, those back injuries don't go away. And we've seen it with a lot of guys, and they end up retiring because that back just doesn't get any better. That's what I worry about with him. Yes, I think the injuries have started to pile up on Tyron Smith. I think the Cowboys do have to start thinking, and have started thinking over the last couple drafts. You can tell that they're kept moving along that offensive line, looking at, well, we're going to have to think about making some changes here if worse comes to worse and Tyron Smith does end his career with an injury at some point. But so you do worry about him a little bit. Lyle Collins was already out of practice before the car crash, so they're a little thin in that offensive line, and then with Travis Frederick retiring. So I don't know that offensive line in Dallas is going to look quite like we've seen it look over the past few years. The Cowboys certainly hope it is.
Tyron Smith doesn't turn 30 until December 12th, so he played most of his rookie season at the age of 20, and that happens from time to time. And that's the counter to the argument, that phony, fake argument. Don't get me started. The NFL and the NFLPA come together to ensure that college football will have the benefit of free labor for 3 years by saying, these guys are too young to compete with men. Well, Tyron Smith at age 20 competed with men for nearly a full season before he turned 21. So once guys are ready, they're ready. Tyron Smith was ready, and he's been getting it done for nearly a decade. And here's hoping that back holds up and he can continue to keep doing it for another decade in the NFL.
Hi, I'm Mike Tirico, and thanks for watching. Make sure to hit subscribe for the latest news and highlights from NBC Sports.